When a renowned psychologist wakes up in a shattered mirror world, nothing, not even her own memories, can be trusted. Each reflection hides a different version of herself, and one of them knows the truth behind the murder she's accused of. To escape, she must face the darkest parts of her mind before reality breaks for good. I step cautiously through the rubble-strewn street, each footfall stirring the dust that hangs heavy in the air like an oppressive shroud. The city I once knew lies in ruins, the familiar skyline fractured, buildings twisted and broken like shards of glass scattered across the earth. Smoke still curls from smoldering wreckage, carrying with it the acrid scent of destruction that clings to my clothes and hair. The silence is pervasive, broken only by the distant wail of sirens and the occasional murmur of voices, fragments of life amid devastation. My breath forms small clouds in the chilly morning air as I move past what used to be a bustling market street. Now it's a graveyard of memories, where shattered windows gape like empty eyes and fallen signs sway weakly in the breeze. I clutch my journal tightly, the worn leather binding a fragile link to the parts of myself I'm desperately trying to hold on to. As I round a corner, a sudden shout cuts through the stillness. I freeze, heart pounding, before recognizing the voice steady, familiar. Jamal steps into view, his face marked by a scar that traces a jagged line across his left cheek, eyes sharp and watchful beneath furrowed brows. He nods at me briefly, a silent acknowledgement of shared loss and unspoken pain. "Maya," he says, voice low but firm. "We need to keep moving. It's not safe here." I swallow, the weight of the past days pressing down like the rubble around us. The blast didn't just tear through concrete and steel. It shattered the very fabric of our lives. Survivors like us navigate this broken landscape, carrying wounds no one can see. The city's ruins mirror the fractures within our hearts. We walk side by side, the tension between us a palpable thread woven from grief and the fragile hope that maybe we can rebuild. The air vibrates with whispers, rumors, fueled by fear, suspicion, and despair. They swirl like the dust motes in the shafts of pale sunlight, coalescing into an invisible presence I sense but cannot name. I think of it as the shadow of fear, the silent, pervasive darkness cast by the bombing's aftermath. It lurks in every glance, every hesitation, every tremor of distrust among us. It is not a person, but a force that grips the city, threatening to unravel the fragile bonds we cling to. Passing a shattered storefront, my eyes catch the glint of broken glass, shards catching the weak sunlight like fleeting stars. A cold wind stirs, carrying with it the echo of voices, some pleading, some angry, all haunted. I press my hand against the crumbling brick, grounding myself in the present even as memories surge unbidden. As dusk approaches, I find a quiet spot on the steps of a ruined building. The city stretches before me, a landscape of scars illuminated by the fading light. I open my journal, the pages blank and waiting, a space where I can pour out the tangled emotions too heavy to carry alone. The shadow of fear settles over us all tonight, but as I write, a small ember of resolve flickers within me. The road ahead is uncertain, littered with obstacles both seen and unseen. Yet I am here, still breathing, still walking among the ruins. And that, perhaps, is the first step toward healing. The night deepens, and the city lies silent once more. But somewhere beyond the shattered glass and broken streets, a fragile hope begins to take root, shaped by the courage of those who refuse to be broken. "Maya," Jamal's voice breaks through my reverie. "We need to find the others." I nod, closing my journal and rising to my feet. The city may be shattered, but its survivors are still here. And so am I. With one last look at the fading light, I step forward into the unknown. The early morning light filtered weakly through the cracked window pane, casting fractured shadows on the worn pages of my journal. I sat curled in the corner of my small apartment, the silence around me both a refuge and a prison. Outside, the city was stirring, sirens wailed in the distance, a reminder of the chaos that still lingered, while the dull murmur of rebuilding efforts filtered through the cracked walls. Yet here I was, trapped in a silence I could neither escape nor embrace. Each day since the bombing had folded into the next like the broken shards of glass that littered the streets below. I often found myself staring at the empty chairs around my kitchen table, the memories of laughter and life now replaced by an aching void. The faces of my husband and children haunted every corner of my mind, their absence a constant ache that refused to dull. I traced the edges of my journal with trembling fingers, the ink barely dry on the words I had struggled to write. Writing was supposed to be my solace, a way to give shape to the chaos inside me. Yet today, the words felt hollow, slipping away before they could take form. I closed the book gently, the weight of survivor's guilt pressing down like a stone on my chest. The community around me was beginning to stir too. I had seen the tentative steps taken by neighbors and strangers alike, small gatherings at the community center, whispered conversations in damaged shops, and the slow, careful restoration of what had been lost. But beneath the surface, the wounds ran deep. Fear, suspicion, and sorrow wove through the air like a thick fog. It was at one of these gatherings that I first met Leila Hassan. She stood at the center of a small group at the community center, her curly hair catching the pale light, her smile warm yet tinged with the grief only those who had lost everything could understand. Leila was a beacon, a steady flame in the darkness, organizing support groups and memorial events with a fierce determination to restore some semblance of hope. "We can't let this tragedy define us," she told us one evening, her voice steady and sure. "Our strength is in our community, in our shared stories and our care for one another. Healing is fragile, yes, but it begins with us." Her words resonated in the room, a tentative balm for many. Yet as I looked around, I saw the guarded expressions, the walls survivors had built to protect themselves from further pain. I realized then that healing was not a path paved with certainty. It was a delicate dance between hope and despair. Contrasting with Leila's nurturing presence was Omar Khalil, the investigative journalist whose sharp gaze seemed to pierce the very soul of our broken city. I had seen him at the community center only briefly, his disheveled appearance and intense eyes marking him as someone who carried scars deeper than the physical. In the cluttered newsroom where he worked, surrounded by stacks of papers and flickering monitors, Omar delved into the shadows left by the bombing. He sought truths hidden beneath layers of silence and denial, pushing against the tide of complacency. Yet his investigations often left him isolated, wrestling with his own demons as he uncovered uncomfortable realities. "People want to forget," Omar had said to me once, his voice low and edged with bitterness. "But forgetting won't heal us. We need to face the truth, no matter how painful." His conviction was undeniable, but so was the weariness etched into his face. It reminded me that trauma wore many masks. Some screamed in silence, others raged in darkness. As days passed, I found myself wandering the shattered streets more frequently, drawn to the broken storefronts and makeshift memorials that dotted the cityscape. Each step echoed with memories and loss. The scent of burnt wood and dust hung heavy in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of flowers placed by grieving hands. The city, once vibrant and alive, now bore the scars of destruction, a physical reflection of the fractures in our lives. Yet, amid the rubble, small signs of life persisted. A child's drawing taped to a cracked window, a faded photograph carefully preserved in a broken frame, a single candle flickering in the night. These fragments of hope clung stubbornly to survival, much like the fragile threads that connected us all. And despite the hollowness inside me, a part of me longed to reach out, to mend the rift between my isolation and the community's cautious embrace. But the path was uncertain. Every step forward seemed shadowed by doubt, every connection threatened by the weight of unspoken grief. I wrestled with the question that haunted my waking hours. How could I forgive myself for living when my family did not? How could I trust a world that had shown itself so cruel? The shadow of fear loomed over us all, not as a person, but as a presence. It whispered in rumors, seeded mistrust among neighbors, and fed the paranoia that sometimes boiled over into anger. We were all prisoners to it in some way, struggling to break free but unsure how. Yet, even in the darkest moments, small lights flickered. Leila's unwavering compassion, Omar's relentless pursuit of truth, and the shared stories of survivors clinging to life all hinted at the possibility of healing. It was fragile, uncertain, and painfully slow, but it was there. I closed my eyes that night, the distant sounds of the city settling into a quiet rhythm. Somewhere beyond the shattered glass and broken streets, beyond the pain and the fear, lay the possibility of renewal. And though I could not yet grasp it, I knew the journey toward that fragile hope had begun. The city's ruins stretched out before me like a cracked mirror, each shard reflecting fragments of a life I barely recognized anymore. I found myself drawn to the community center more often these days, not because I sought company, but because the quiet there was different. It was a refuge from the endless echoes of the blast that rattled my mind, a place where the weight of silence was bearable, almost sacred. One chilly afternoon, I sat in the corner of a small room painted in soft, pale blues colors, chosen to soothe, I was told. The light filtered in through tall windows, casting long shadows that danced gently across the worn wooden floor. In my lap rested my journal, its pages a sanctuary where my thoughts could roam freely, unjudged and raw. My pen hovered hesitantly before I began to write, fingers trembling as the words spilled out in uneven lines. The city is a ghost now, a hollow shell filled with memories I can't escape. The faces of my family haunt every corner. How do I live in a place where the ground still trembles with their absence? Writing was both a balm and a torment. Each sentence forced me to confront the cavernous void left by their loss, yet it was the only way I could reach the pieces of myself that felt scattered and broken. The journal became a mirror to my soul's fractures, silent yet screaming in ink. Across the city, Jamal moved with a restless energy that belied his calm exterior. His muscular frame was a fortress, but beneath it lay a fierce protectiveness, especially for his younger sister, Sophia, an anxious teenager whose once bright eyes were now shadowed by fear. I often saw them together during our visits to the community center. Jamal's presence was a shield, his hand steady on Sophia's shoulder as she navigated the overwhelming aftermath of that day. During one support group meeting, I watched as Sophia sat curled into herself, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. Her wide eyes darted around the crowded room, where stories of grief and survival interwove like fragile threads. "It's okay to be scared," Jamal whispered quietly, his voice a low rumble of reassurance. "We're here, and we're not alone." His words, simple yet profound, seemed to anchor her momentarily. It was in these small acts of care that the invisible wounds of trauma began to surface, demanding acknowledgement even when the body bore no scars. It was during one of these group sessions that Dr. Elias Nader introduced himself to us. His presence was calm and measured, a steady beacon amid the storm of emotions that often threatened to overwhelm. With glasses perched on the bridge of his nose and a gentle smile that never felt forced, he spoke of healing not just the body but the mind and soul. "We carry many scars," he said, addressing the group. "Some are visible, others hidden deep within, but all deserve attention. Therapy isn't a sign of weakness. It's a tool to reclaim your life." His words resonated deeply, though the path ahead felt daunting. I found myself returning to his sessions week after week, drawn not only by his understanding, but also by the communal hope that flickered in that small room. Between visits, I continued to write. My journal became a tapestry of my internal landscape, moments of despair interspersed with glimmers of hope. One night, as the city slept under a fragile veil of darkness, I spread the pages out on my table. The soft glow of a desk lamp illuminated the inked words, testimonies of pain, resilience, and the slow stirrings of acceptance. Each entry was a step forward, a tentative bridge from isolation to connection. Yet, the journey was far from linear. Some days, the shadows returned with relentless force, threatening to swallow the fragile progress. But even then, the act of writing, of naming the fear, was a quiet rebellion against the silence that tried to claim me. In the background, Jamal's unwavering support for Sophia reminded me that survival was not just about endurance, but about the bonds we forged in the aftermath. His struggle with anger and his efforts to protect his sister mirrored my own battles with guilt and withdrawal. Together, our stories intertwined, a testament to the complexity of grief and the unspoken understanding shared by those who walk through fire. The community center, once a mere building amidst rubble, had transformed into a sanctuary where fractured souls gathered to rebuild not just their city but their spirits. Under Dr. Nader's guidance, we learned to face the silent scars that lingered long after the physical wounds healed. There was no quick fix, no magic balm, only the slow, painstaking work of healing. One breath, one word, one shared moment at a time. As I closed my journal that evening, a quiet thought settled within me. Amidst so much brokenness, perhaps there was still room for hope. Fragile, uncertain, but real. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, healing was possible. The sun hung low over the battered city, casting long shadows through the skeletal remains of once familiar streets. Maya Alami perched on the cracked steps of a half-collapsed building, her fingers tracing the rough cement as if it might anchor her drifting thoughts. Beside her, Jamal shifted uneasily, his scarred cheek catching the fading light. The air was thick with dust and the distant murmur of recovery efforts, but between them, an unspoken weight pressed heavily. "I never thought I'd see this place again," Maya whispered, eyes fixed on the horizon where smoke still curled faintly from distant fires. And yet, here we are, trying to make sense of what's left. Jamal nodded, his gaze distant. "It's like the city's been wounded, but so have we. Sometimes I wonder if the pain inside is worse than the rubble outside." She swallowed, the familiar lump of survivor's guilt tightening her throat. "I write it down sometimes, all the things I can't say aloud. Maybe that's why I come here, to remind myself that I'm still alive, even if everything else feels broken." He glanced at her, the hard lines of his face softening for a moment. "I keep a photo of my crew in my wallet. Lost a lot that day, but I have to keep moving for Sophia's sake." The mention of his sister stirred a flicker of warmth in Maya's chest. Their shared grief, though expressed differently, formed a fragile bridge between them. Days later, the community center buzzed with cautious energy. Leila Hassan stood at the front, her curly hair catching the fluorescent lights as she addressed the gathered survivors. Her bright smile was a beacon, though Maya glimpsed the flicker of pain behind it. "We've been through unimaginable loss," Leila said, voice steady but gentle. "But together we can build a future, one where fear doesn't rule us." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, yet beneath the surface, eyes darted nervously, whispers of doubt threading through the crowd like a bitter undertow. The shadow of fear lingered, invisible but palpable. Meanwhile, Omar Khalil sat hunched over a cluttered desk in a cramped apartment, the walls plastered with newspaper clippings and photographs. His fingers traced the edges of a survivor's diary he'd recently found, pages filled with raw, unfiltered accounts of the bombing's chaos. "There's more to this," Omar muttered to himself, eyes scanning for inconsistencies. Someone wanted to bury the truth. His discovery sent ripples through the community, stirring unease that threatened to fracture the tentative solidarity Leila worked so hard to sustain. That evening, as the meeting dispersed, two survivors' hushed voices rose in accusation. Fear morphed into suspicion, and suspicion into anger. Shadows lengthened as the city held its breath, the fragile threads binding its people strained to the breaking point. Maya watched from a distance, heart heavy. The journey toward healing was just beginning, but the path was fraught with shadows, both seen and unseen. Yet, in the midst of darkness, a fragile hope flickered, fragile but real. And as the night deepened, the city waited, fragile glass reflecting the first tentative light of dawn. The evening settled over the city like a silken shroud, the remnants of daylight fading into a twilight soaked with melancholy. Inside her modest apartment, Maya Alami sat hunched over her journal, the pages illuminated by the soft glow of a flickering lamp. The room was silent but for the scratch of her pen. Tracing memories she struggled to voice aloud, the echo of her children's laughter, the warmth of their small hands in hers. Moments now shattered and scattered like broken glass. She closed her eyes, willing the past to come alive. A flash of sunlight danced across the kitchen table where her daughter, Noor, had once sat. Fingers sticky with honey, the sound of her innocent giggle ringing in Maya's ears. Her son Sami had chased a stray cat down the hallway, his youthful exuberance filling the cramped space with life. Those were the days before the bombing, before the world had cracked open and spilled its darkness into every corner of her existence. Pain pressed against her chest like a vice, but beneath it stirred a fragile thread of determination. She opened her eyes and returned to her journal, the act both a balm and a burden. Writing was her refuge, a way to wrestle with the unbearable weight of loss, to give form to the nameless fears that clawed at her. Outside, the city breathed unevenly. Streets bore the scars of devastation craters where buildings once stood proud, windows like vacant eyes staring blankly into the grey sky. Amid the rubble, life persisted in stubborn bursts, the distant wail of sirens, the murmur of voices piecing together fragments of normalcy, the flutter of a tattered flag clinging to a broken pole. Maya's thoughts shifted to Jamal, Farid, whose presence had become a constant in this fractured landscape. She remembered their last conversation, the tension vibrating between them like an unspoken current. Jamal's anger was a flame that threatened to consume, his desire for justice burning hotter with each passing day. Yet, Leila Hassan, with her steady voice and hopeful eyes, called for peace, urging the community to heal through unity and forgiveness. That very afternoon, Maya had accompanied Jamal to the site where his old firehouse once stood. The charred remains whispered stories of bravery and loss. Jamal's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tight as he stared into the abyss left by the blast. Leila had approached cautiously, her words soft but firm, attempting to temper his rage with compassion. "Jamal," she had said gently, "I know the pain feels unbearable, but we have to find a way to rebuild not just the buildings, but the trust between us." He had turned sharply, his eyes dark pools of frustration. "Trust? How can I trust when the people responsible walk free? When the truth is buried beneath lies?" Leila's smile faltered, but her resolve did not. "Justice is part of healing, yes, but so is forgiveness. We can't let fear and anger dictate our future." Jamal's silence was a storm gathering strength. Maya had felt the weight of it, the chasm opening wider between their paths. Yet she understood both sides, the need for righteous anger and the yearning for peace. Meanwhile, within the fragile walls of their shared world, Sophia Farid's struggle deepened. The teenager's anxiety had grown into a shadow that stalked her every step. The smaller sound sirens, raised voices, even the creak of a door could send her into a tremor of panic. One evening, Maya had found Sophia in her bedroom, curled into herself, eyes wide with terror. The distant hum of a siren outside triggered a cascade of trembling and tears. Jamal stood at the door, torn between wanting to hold his sister close and the helplessness that gnawed at his soul. "It's okay, Sophia," Maya had whispered, sitting beside her. "You're safe here." But safety felt elusive, a fragile concept shattered by the trauma they all bore. Sophia's pain was a mirror reflecting the city's fragile pulsar community on edge, caught between fear and the hope of healing. Back at the community center, Leila gathered survivors for a meeting. Her voice cut through the heavy air, steady and warm. "We've lost so much," she began, eyes sweeping across the room, "but together we can find strength. We can rebuild not just walls, but the bonds that make us whole." The room was a mosaic of weary faces, some skeptical, others hungry for hope. Maya watched as the words planted seeds, delicate but real of resilience. Yet beneath this fragile veneer lay unspoken tensions. The divergent paths of Jamal's fiery justice and Leila's gentle peace were not easy to reconcile. Maya felt herself caught in the middle, her own grief a silent barrier she struggled to dismantle. That night, as the city's lights blinked uncertainly through the haze, Maya lay awake, her mind threading through memories and fears. Could healing emerge from this tangle of pain and anger? Could the community find a way to walk forward without fracturing further? Her pen scratched once more across the journal page, a whisper of hope etched in ink. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but somewhere beneath the surface, a fragile light flickered, waiting to be nurtured into dawn. The chapter closed on this fragile tension, a pause before the inevitable reckoning. The survivors, each bearing their own wounds, stood at the crossroads of grief and hope, their fates intertwined in the city's slow, arduous journey toward healing. And as shadows lengthened, the question lingered: how would they choose to move forward in a world forever altered? The evening air was thick with an uneasy stillness as I entered Omar's cramped apartment, the faint glow of a single desk lamp casting long shadows over piles of papers and worn books. The city outside still bore the scars of that terrible day, but here, in this small room, a fragile hope flickered, born from a discovery that might change everything. Omar sat hunched over a tattered diary, its leather cover cracked and softened by time and handling. His fingers trembled slightly as he turned the yellowed pages. The ink faded, but the words sharp and vivid. "This," he said quietly, "is a survivor's story, one we haven't heard before. I leaned closer, catching the faint scent of old paper and dust rising from the fragile book. The diary belonged to someone who had been caught in the blast, someone who had lived through the chaos and terror, and now, through these words, spoke to us across the gulf of pain and silence. As Omar read aloud, his voice low and steady, the room seemed to shrink around us, the weight of memory pressing down. The survivor wrote of the first explosion, terrible, shattering sound that tore through the bustling streets like a cruel thunderclap. They described the confusion and the screams, the desperate scramble for safety, the faces of friends lost to the smoke and ruin. But amid the horror, there were moments of humanity, a shared glance, a helping hand, a whispered promise to survive. The diary was raw and unfiltered, a mosaic of fear, grief, and fragile hope. I found myself clutching the pages as if they were a lifeline. The words echoed my own pain, the loss of my family, the emptiness that had settled deep inside me. Yet, in the survivor's voice, there was also a call to remember, to bear witness, to hold on to the fragile threads that still connected us. The next day, Omar brought the diary to the community center. Leila, ever the heart of our fragile group, organized a gathering where survivors could listen, share, and confront the truths the diary revealed. The room was quiet at first, the weight of unspoken stories heavy in the air. As passages were read aloud, faces softened, tears fell, and a shared understanding began to bloom. Yet, the diary's revelations also stirred darker currents. Rumors began to circulate, whispers of negligence, of security lapses, of secrets kept by those in power. The shadow of fear crept in again, unseen but palpable, sowing distrust and suspicion among us. Voices rose in anger and fear, accusations flared, and the delicate bonds we had begun to rebuild trembled under the strain. In the midst of the turmoil, I found solace in quiet moments reading the diary alone, writing my own reflections in my journal, and confiding in Omar and Leila. I sensed a subtle shift within me, a tentative opening of the heart that had long been closed. Leila moved among us like a steady flame, offering comfort and calm. I watched her soothe a frightened child, her voice soft and unwavering, a reminder that even in the darkest times, compassion could shine through. As the days passed, the community wrestled with the truths unearthed by that fragile book. Would we allow fear to divide us further, or could we find strength in our shared pain? The answers were not clear, but the diary had forced us to confront the past in a way we never had before. And so, beneath the shadow of uncertainty, amidst whispers of truth and fear, the slow work of healing continued. Our city was broken, our hearts fragile, but within those cracks, a flicker of hope glimmered, waiting to be nurtured. The diary was more than a collection of memories. It was a mirror held up to our collective soul, reflecting loss and resilience, despair and courage. As I closed its cover one evening, I realized that our journey was no longer solitary. We were bound together by the stories we shared, the wounds we dared to expose, and the fragile promise of tomorrow. Yet, questions lingered. Could we trust one another again? Could we face the shadows that haunted us without losing ourselves? The answers lay ahead in the days to come, as whispers of truth echoed through the shattered streets and fragile hearts of our city. The night deepened outside, but within me, a quiet determination took root. The air inside the community hall was thick, heavy with unspoken grievances and the brittle silence of collective trauma. The low hum of whispered conversations was suddenly shattered by a sharp voice rising above the rest. How can we trust anyone when no one tells the truth? A man's words, edged with raw accusation, ricocheted against the peeling walls, igniting a spark that quickly grew into a blaze. Chairs scraped harshly against the worn floor as voices erupted into shouts, accusations flying like shards of broken glass. Maya stood near the back, her journal clutched tightly in her hands, the leather cover creased from frequent use. Her heart pounded, eyes scanning the faces twisted by fear and anger. She recognized some neighbors she'd shared quiet moments with in the community center, others strangers drawn together by tragedy but divided by suspicion. Jamal was at her side, his broad frame tense, eyes flicking from person to person, muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. Enough, Jamal's voice cut through the chaos, firm and commanding. He stepped forward, hands raised, trying to anchor the storm swirling around them. We're all hurting. Pointing fingers won't bring anyone back. We have to stand together, not tear each other apart. His words, though steady, barely rose above the clamoring voices. A woman near the front, face pale and eyes wild, spat back, stand together, while secrets fester, while those in power sweep the truth under the rug. We deserve answers, not platitudes. Leila Hassan moved calmly through the crowd, her presence a balm amid the rising tension. Her voice was gentle but resolute as she addressed the group. I understand your pain. We all want justice and healing, but anger won't heal wounds or build bridges. Let's take a breath, listen to each other. Compassion has to be our foundation. Despite her soothing tone, the room remained charged. The fragile bonds between survivors stretched thin. Maya's thoughts drifted to the shadow that had hovered over the city since the bombing, the invisible force of fear that whispered doubt and suspicion into every heart. Tonight, it felt as though that shadow had solidified into a tangible wall between them. Outside, the cold night air bit sharply through the cracked windows. Sophia Fered huddled close to her brother, trembling. The anxiety that had plagued her since the bombing seemed to intensify in the charged atmosphere. She clung to Jamal's jacket, seeking the protection her young heart desperately craved. Inside, the confrontation escalated as a man accused another of withholding vital information about the bombing's aftermath. Voices rose, and suddenly a chair was hurled across the room, crashing against the wall with a sickening crack. Gasps echoed, and for a moment the room teetered on the edge of chaos. Jamal moved quickly, stepping between the two men, his voice low but firm. This isn't the way. We have to fight with words, not fists. Maya felt tears prick her eyes as she watched the scene unfold. The raw pain etched on every face mirrored her own turmoil, the relentless struggle between hope and despair. She thought of her journal, the pages filled with her deepest fears and memories, a silent witness to her journey through grief. As voices slowly calmed under Leila's persistent mediation, Maya realized that the fractures in their trust were as much internal as external. Fear had wrapped itself around their hearts, making openness and forgiveness seem impossible. Yet, in the midst of the turmoil, the faintest glimmer of connection remained a fragile thread linking them all. The meeting ended with no clear resolution, but the eruption had forced buried emotions into the light. Maya and Jamal walked home side by side, the night air cool against their skin. Sophia stayed close, her small hand clutching Jamal's. We can't keep living like this, Maya said quietly, breaking the silence. We have to find a way through the darkness. Jamal nodded, his jaw tight. We will, but it won't be easy. Fear doesn't just disappear overnight. As they disappeared into the shadows of the fractured city, the weight of the night lingered. The path ahead was uncertain, marked by mistrust and pain. Yet beneath it all, a fragile hope persisted, one that might, in time, mend the shattered glass of their lives. The question remained suspended in the cold air. Could they rebuild not only the city's broken walls, but the fractured hearts within? And somewhere deep inside, Maya knew the answer depended not on the absence of fear, but on their courage to face it together. The sun dipped low behind the fractured skyline, casting long, uneven shadows across the cracked pavement of the city streets. Jamal Farid stood before the looming edifice of the city hall, his breath steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside him. The scar on his left cheek, a relic from his days battling flames, caught the fading light as he clenched and unclenched his fists. Around him, a small crowd of reporters whispered and adjusted their equipment, their lenses and microphones trained on the moment that was about to unfold. Jamal's mind raced through every word he had rehearsed, every argument he had sharpened in the quiet hours since dawn. He was no stranger to confrontation, having faced down infernos and chaos, but today's battle was different. It was not against flames or rubble, but against the invisible failures that had left his city vulnerable. The bombing had shattered not only buildings, but the very trust that held the community together. Back in her dimly lit apartment, Maya Alami sat at her desk, the soft scratch of pen against paper the only sound breaking the silence. Her journal lay open before her, pages filled with jagged lines and looping scripture, testament to the turmoil roiling beneath her calm exterior. She paused, fingers hovering over the paper, before continuing to write. Each word was a fragile step towards something she had long resisted, forgiveness, not just of others, but of herself. Outside, the city hummed with restless energy. The shadow of fear, though unseen, pressed heavily on the minds of all who lived here. Rumors and suspicions drifted through neighborhoods like smoke, threatening to choke the tentative hope that had begun to bloom. Earlier that evening, Leila Hassan had gathered survivors in the cramped community center, the room thick with the mixed scents of stale coffee and worn upholstery. Voices rose and fell in heated debate, a cacophony of anger, fear, and cautious optimism. Leila's bright smile, though often a mask for her own pain, served as a beacon, urging the fractured group toward solidarity. Yet beneath the surface, divisions ran deep. Jamal's decision to confront the authorities was both a catalyst and a wedge, stirring old wounds even as it promised a path forward. In a nearby room, Dr. Elias Nader listened attentively as Maya shared her struggles during a therapy session. The soft ticking of the clock punctuated the room's stillness, each tick a reminder of time passing, the slow, painful passage toward healing. Maya's voice trembled as she spoke of guilt and mistrust, her eyes fixed on a point beyond the walls. When a tear finally escaped, it was a release long overdue. Jamal's footsteps echoed through the marble halls of City Hall as he made his way to the hearing room. The air was thick with expectation, reporters jostling for position, cameras flashing like distant lightning. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice steady but charged with the weight of loss. He spoke of security lapses, of ignored warnings and unanswered calls, his words slicing through the hushed crowd like a blade. The room responded with a mixture of shock, anger, and reluctant agreement. Some survivors found in Jamal's courage the strength to demand justice. Others feared that his confrontation might fracture the fragile truce that held their community together. Maya, watching from the sidelines, felt the familiar pull of survivors' guilt and hesitation. Yet she stood by Jamal, offering a steadying hand and a shared resolve. As the night deepened, the city outside seemed to hold its breath. The crossroads had been reached. Would this reckoning lead to the accountability so desperately needed, or would it deepen the fractures already threatening to tear their world apart? Maya closed her journal and looked out her window at the city lights, each one a small flame against the gathering darkness. Somewhere within that fragile glow lay hope, tenuous, flickering, but undeniably alive. And with that hope came the first whispers of healing. The therapy room was quiet, save for the soft patter of rain against the window pane. Outside, the city's broken skyline blurred behind the glass, smeared by the gentle drizzle. Maya sat across from Dr. Elias Nader, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her sleeve. The air was thick with the unspoken, a fragile tension that seemed to hold her heart captive. For weeks, she had come here, carrying the weight of silence like a shroud. She had listened, nodded, and let the sessions pass without revealing the tempest locked inside. But today felt different. Something in the way Dr. Nader's calm eyes met hers, steady and inviting, made the walls she had built begin to crumble. "Tell me what you're feeling," he said softly, his voice a balm to her frayed nerves. Maya swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing. She looked down at her hands, trembling beneath the weight of memories she had tried so hard to bury. The faces of her children flashed behind her eyelids, their laughter, the chaos of everyday life, and then the searing blast that had ripped her world apart. Tears welled up and spilled over before she could stop them. "I feel lost," she whispered, "like I'm trapped in a glass cage, shattered but still holding together somehow." Dr. Nader nodded gently. "That's a powerful image. It's okay to feel broken, Maya. Healing isn't about becoming whole again right away, it's about learning to live with the cracks." The words resonated deep inside her. For so long, she had believed her grief was a prison. Now, she glimpsed the possibility of something else, fragile, tentative healing. Later that evening, Maya met Jamal on a quiet street corner. The city was cloaked in the soft hues of twilight, the air cool and still. For a moment, they stood in silence, the distance between them charged with the weight of unspoken pain. "I've been thinking about what you said the other day," Maya began hesitantly, "about how we don't have to carry this alone." Jamal's jaw tightened, but then he exhaled, a slow release of tension. "It's hard. I've spent so long trying to be strong for Sophia, for everyone, but sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in anger." She reached out, briefly touching his arm. "Maybe it's okay to let the water wash over us instead of fighting it all the time." A faint smile broke through his usual guarded expression. "Maybe." Their steps fell into rhythm as they walked, the city around them humming with quiet resilience. The shattered buildings stood as monuments to loss, but also to the stubborn spirit that refused to yield. Back at the community center, Maya curled into a chair by the window, her journal open on her lap. The scratch of her pen filled the room, mingling with the soft murmur of voices and distant laughter. Survivors shared stories, their voices weaving a tapestry of pain and hope. She wrote about the therapy session, about the tears that had surprised her, about the first flicker of light in a long, dark tunnel. The pages were stained with the rawness of her emotions, but also with the fragile promise of healing. As the night deepened, Maya closed her journal and looked up, the weight on her chest feeling just a little lighter. The shadow that had loomed so large began to recede, not vanished but diminished. Dr. Nader's words echoed in her mind, living with the cracks, not hiding them. The journey ahead was uncertain. There would be setbacks, moments of despair, and days when the silence felt deafening. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, Maya allowed herself to hope. Hope that the shattered glass of her life could catch the light, refracting it in new and unexpected ways. And as she stepped outside into the cool night air, The city's distant glow seemed to pulse with the same fragile heartbeat she felt within her, testament to survival, to endurance, and to the quiet power of breaking the silence. The story was far from over, but the first words had been spoken. What would come next was unknown, but for the first time, Maya was ready to face it. The city plaza was transformed that evening, its usual grey stones softened by the flickering light of hundreds of candles. Survivors gathered, hesitant but drawn together by Leila's tireless efforts to organize the memorial. The air was cool, the sky a deepening blue that promised night, but the warmth of human presence held the chill at bay. Maya arrived early, her journal tucked under her arm like a talisman. She found a quiet spot near the makeshift monument, a simple structure of broken glass shards fused into a mosaic of remembrance and resilience. Around her, faces familiar and strange alike gathered, some marked by tears, others by stoic silence. The scent of fresh flowers mingled with the faint smoke of incense Leila had arranged to honor the dead. Maya's heart ached as names were quietly spoken, loved ones lost, dreams shattered, futures stolen. Yet, beneath the sorrow, there was an undercurrent of something new, something fragile and electrifying, the stirrings of hope. Leila stepped forward, her voice steady but textured with emotion. Tonight, we gather not only to mourn, but to remember the strength that still lives within us, she said, eyes shining with unshed tears. The light we share here is a beacon, not just for those we have lost, but for all of us who remain. Maya watched as the crowd responded, candles raised high, faces illuminated by the golden glow. Jamal stood nearby, his presence solid and reassuring. He held Sophia close, whispering words only she could hear, a barrier against the creeping shadows that still haunted her. The ceremony flowed with quiet prayers and shared stories. Survivors stepped forward to lay flowers, to touch the mosaic, to leave behind tokens of memory. Maya found herself compelled to write a few lines in her journal, capturing the mingled grief and hope that filled the night air. Each word was a small step away from silence, from the walls she had built around her pain. As the event drew to a close, a gentle breeze stirred the flames, and Maya felt a shift within herself, as if the collective heart of the city beat stronger tonight. The shadow of fear had not vanished, but it was no longer all-encompassing. There was space now for healing, for connection, for the slow rebuilding of trust. Walking home later, Maya thought of the countless broken pieces' lives, families, dreams, and how, like the glass in the mosaic, they could be fused into something new and beautiful. Fragile, yes, but real. She looked up at the stars, distant and cold, but constant, and for the first time in many months, she allowed herself to believe in a future where light could break through even the deepest darkness. The night was far from over, and the road ahead uncertain. But tonight, the shadows lifted, if only a little, and that was enough to kindle a fragile flame of hope that might one day grow into something stronger. With a final glance back at the glowing plaza, Maya whispered to herself, "We will survive. We will heal." And though the city still bore its scars, in that moment, it was alive with possibility. The night settled quietly over the city, but within Maya, a new resolve was taking root. The journey toward healing was just beginning, and she was ready to take the first steps, no longer alone. The evening air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked asphalt as I made my way through the cracked sidewalks toward the small cafe where we had agreed to meet. The city around me bore its scars with a stubborn resilience, boarded-up windows patched over with hastily nailed plywood, faded murals painted over the rubble, and the distant drone of construction equipment laboring to stitch the broken streets back together. Yet here I was, about to face a different kind of rebuilding, the fragile architecture of family long fractured. I pushed open the cafe door, a soft chime announcing my arrival, and spotted him immediately. My brother sat hunched at a corner table, the light from a half-burnt candle flickering against the worn wood, casting delicate shadows across his weathered face. His eyes, dark and guarded, lifted to meet mine with a mixture of surprise and wariness. The years apart stretched between us like a chasm, filled with anger, grief, and misunderstandings that had never been properly voiced. "Maya," he said quietly, his voice rough but steady, "I wasn't sure you'd come." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of that simple word come as if it were a bridge extending out from both of us, trembling under the strain of old wounds. "Neither was I," I admitted, sliding into the seat opposite him. Our hands brushed briefly as I set my worn journal on the table, a silent testament to the stories I had carried alone for so long. For a while we sat in silence, the only sound the steady patter of rain against the windowpane. Outside, the city's restless pulse continued, ambitious and unyielding, but inside, time seemed suspended, caught between past and present. "I've thought about you every day," he finally said, voice low. "After everything, I didn't know how to reach out." I nodded, the familiar ache of loss and regret blooming anew. "I felt abandoned," I confessed, eyes tracing the delicate rim of my coffee cup, "like you left me to carry it all alone." He looked down, ashamed. "I was scared of what you'd say, scared of what I might feel, but I'm here now." The tension between us began to unravel, thread by tentative thread. Words came easier then, stories spilled forth, shared memories of childhood laughter, the warmth of family dinners, the unbearable silence after the blast. We spoke of grief, of blame, and of the desperate hope to find some semblance of peace. Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, Jamal was engaged in a quieter but no less profound battle. His younger sister, Sophia, sat curled on the worn couch in their apartment, her fingers trembling as she clutched a small, worn blanket. The shadows cast by the late afternoon sun stretched long across the cracked walls, echoing the shadows in her eyes. Jamal knelt beside her, his large hands steadying her shaking ones. "Breathe with me, Sophia," he murmured softly, guiding her through slow, measured inhales and exhales. The room was filled with the fragile sound of her uneven breathing gradually smoothing, the tension in her body loosening like a knot slowly undone. "You're safe here," Jamal whispered, the unwavering steadiness in his voice, a bomb against the storm of anxiety that so often threatened to overwhelm her. "I'm here. We'll get through this." Sophia's eyes flickered with gratitude and fear, the vulnerability raw and unguarded. In that moment, the protective barrier Jamal so often wore cracked, revealing the deep well of love and worry beneath his resolute exterior. Back in my small apartment, I sat alone late into the night, flipping through an old photo album that felt heavier with each page. The faded images' smiling faces frozen in sunlit moments were ghosts of a life that once was. My fingers traced the outlines of my husband's face, my children's laughter captured in frozen frames, and a pang of sorrow tightened my chest. Outside, the distant hum of machinery and voices was a reminder that the city continued to heal, brick by brick, street by street. Yet within me, the process was slower and more uncertain, a delicate negotiation between holding on and letting go. The following weekend, a community center event brought survivors together in a fragile gathering of shared pain and cautious hope. The room was warm and filled with murmurs, the clinking of teacups, and the soft rustle of pages as people exchanged stories and memories. Stained glass windows filtered sunlight into shimmering patterns across the faces of those present, each marked by loss but illuminated by resilience. I saw my brother across the room, standing awkwardly beside familiar faces. Our eyes met briefly, and we shared a small, hesitant smiler, silent acknowledgement of the distance we were beginning to close. These moments, painful, fragile, and uncertain, were pieces of a larger mosaic. Just as the city struggled to rebuild its shattered streets, we were piecing together the fragments of our pasts, learning to forgive, to trust, and to hope again. But the path ahead was long, and the shadows that haunted us were never far behind. Yet, in these delicate threads of connection, I sensed the faint stirrings of something new, a fragile light, fragile but real, promising the possibility of healing. As I left the event that evening, the cool air wrapped around me like a tentative embrace. I carried within me the weight of memory and the spark of renewal, knowing that though the glass of our lives remained shattered, it could still catch the light in unexpected ways. And so, with cautious steps, I moved forward toward reconciliation, toward hope, toward the uncertain but necessary journey of rebuilding not just a city, but the fragile bonds of family and community. The community center's modest hall was packed to its seams, the air thick with anticipation and a palpable undercurrent of tension. Maya stood near the back, her journal clutched tightly in her hands, her tired eyes scanning the faces, the weary, the hopeful, and the hardened. At the front, Jamal Farid's form was rigid, his presence commanding attention despite the unrest brewing in the room. "We cannot move forward by burying the truth," Jamal's voice rang out, steady but edged with the rawness of his pain. The bombing was not just a random act of violence, it was a failure of those who were supposed to protect us. We owe it to the victims, to those who lost their lives and those who survive, to demand accountability. His words echoed off the cracked walls, stirring murmurs among the crowd. Some nodded in fierce agreement, others exchanged uneasy glances. Leila Hassan stepped forward, her bright smile dimmed by the weight of the moment. Her voice was calm but resolute as she countered, "Justice is vital, Jamal, but so is healing. We must not let anger blind us to the power of forgiveness and the strength found in community. If we fracture now, the shadow of fear wins." A ripple of debate surged through the room. Maya felt the sharp sting of division slicing through the fragile bonds the survivors had been painstakingly weaving. She recalled the late nights spent writing in her journal, searching for words strong enough to hold her grief, yet gentle enough to foster hope. Jamal's clenched fists betrayed the storm within. "Forgiveness without truth is a hollow bomb," he insisted. "We deserve transparency. We deserve justice. Without it, we are just waiting for the next shadow to fall." Leila's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "But justice must not become vengeance," she whispered. "If we lose each other now, we lose everything." Meanwhile, in a cramped apartment cluttered with papers and flickering screens, Omar Khalil sat hunched over a desk. His intense eyes scanned the latest batch of documents, internal memoranda, security reports, and confidential correspondence. His fingers trembled slightly as a cold, hard truth crystallized. A systematic cover-up of security lapses that had left the city vulnerable. This revelation, if made public, could ignite the already volatile community into open conflict. Omar's phone buzzed. A message from Maya: "Meeting is getting heated. Need your insight." He rubbed his eyes and typed back, "Truth must see the light, no matter the cost." Back at the community center, Maya's heart ached as she observed the growing chasm between those who sought retribution and those who yearned for peace. Jamal's fiery speeches stirred memories of his lost colleagues, his scarred cheek a silent testament to battles fought both external and internal. Leila's gentle hands, so often a balm to the wounded, now trembled with the burden of holding a fractured community together. A voice from the crowd rose in anger, accusing Jamal of stirring unrest. Another called out in support of Leila's vision of reconciliation. The room rippled with conflict, the air thick with suspicion and fear. The shadow of fear, though unseen, loomed larger than ever. Maya stepped forward hesitantly, clearing her throat. "We are all survivors," she said softly, "carrying wounds that may never fully heal. But if we tear each other apart now, what hope remains? We must find a path that honors our pain and respects our need for truth and peace." Her words hung in the charged silence, a fragile thread stretched taut between opposing forces. Jamal's gaze met hers, and for a moment the anger softened, replaced by weary understanding. Leila nodded, a tentative smile breaking through her fatigue. But beneath the fragile truce, Omar's uncovered truths threatened to shatter the delicate balance. The community stood at a crossroads, with lines drawn deep and wide. The question lingered, heavy and unresolved. Could justice and forgiveness coexist, or would their struggle pull the survivors apart forever? As the meeting adjourned, Maya felt the weight of the moment settle over her like a dense fog. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and possibility. Yet, somewhere within the tangled web of pain and hope, she sensed the faintest glimmer of a future where healing might yet prevail. The night outside was silent, but the city's heartbeat thrummed beneath the shattered glass and fractured lives of fragile, persistent pulse of resilience. And somewhere, deep within that pulse, the shadow of fear waited, waiting to see which way the survivors would turn. The hall had emptied, leaving behind only the echoes of heated words and tentative promises. Jamal stood alone by the broken window, gazing out at the city's fractured skyline. The scar on his cheek caught the last glint of twilight, a reminder of battles fought and scars carried. Leila approached quietly, her footsteps soft against the worn floor. "You carry so much anger," she said gently. "But anger can destroy or fuel change. Which will you choose?" He sighed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I want change," he replied, "but I'm afraid of losing myself in the fight." She smiled, a warmth that reached her eyes. "Then let us fight together for justice and for peace. We need both if we are to survive." Jamal nodded slowly, the lines between their ideals blurring in the growing dusk. Outside, the city breathed in the darkness, fragile and waiting. Maya watched from a distance, her journal forgotten at her side. The lines drawn tonight were only the beginning. The true battle for the soul of the city and for their own had just begun. The next morning, Omar sat at his desk, a fresh determination etched on his face. The documents before him were not just papers, but keys to unlocking the truth hidden beneath layers of fear and silence. He picked up his phone and dialed Maya's number. "We have to be ready," he said. "The truth will change everything." Maya listened, her heart pounding. The fragile hope of yesterday was now a fragile resolve. The city's shattered glass might yet reflect a new light, but only if they dared to face the shadows within. The room felt unusually warm. Swallowed hard. "I don't know the weight deserves to feel this much pressing down on her chest," blending. She flipped to a blank page and began to read. Sometimes I think her voice barely above a whisper, pretending to edges, biting the words spilled out like fragments of shattered glass. Dr. Nader nodded thoughtfully. Across from her, Survivor's Guilt is a common shadow. She told of the endless calm brown eyes, but acknowledging your silence doesn't break your weak, but not the hollow ache where her family once was. Healing begins, adjusting you allow yourself to feel her whole. Later that week, at the community center, Maya noticed Sophia, Farid, seated quietly near the back of a small circle. The teenager's usual restless energy was subdued, replaced by a fragile stillness that tugged at Maya's heart. As the group facilitator encouraged each participant to share, Sophia's voice trembled as she spoke. Sometimes the world feels too big, Sophia admitted, twisting a silver bracelet around her wrist. I get scared for no reason, and my heart races like it's trying to escape. I don't know how to make it stop. A hush fell over the room, the collective breath held in empathy. Jamal sat close, his jaw clenched but his hand subtly reaching to squeeze Sophia's shoulder. Maya watched the exchange, feeling a flicker of understanding ignite within her. The invisible wounds they all carried were real, and they could no longer be ignored. Dr. Nader's voice echoed in her memory from a recent community meeting. Trauma is not always visible. It seeps into the corners of our minds and hearts, shaping how we see ourselves and each other. The first step to healing is breaking the silence, sharing our stories without shame. Inspired, Maya volunteered to help organize a new support program at the center, hoping to weave threads of solidarity among the fractured survivors. The work was small yet significant, arranging chairs, preparing tea, listening as others spoke. Each shared story chipped away at the walls she had built around herself. One afternoon, as laughter bubbled softly from a group gathered around a chessboard, Maya caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. Tired eyes, yes, but also a tentative spark of hope. The shadow that had loomed so large was still present, but it no longer consumed her every thought. When she arrived home that evening, Maya opened her journal once more, fingers trembling as she wrote, "Today, I let someone in. It's frightening, like standing on a narrow ledge with no safety net. But maybe this is how we learn to fly." Outside, the city hummed with cautious life, the ruins slowly giving way to new beginnings. The unseen wounds remained delicate and raw, but for the first time, Maya felt the fragile stirrings of healing take root within her. As night settled, a quiet determination settled in her heart. Tomorrow, she would return to the center, to the people who carried pieces of her own pain. Together, perhaps, they could build something stronger, a mosaic of survival, resilience, and hope. Yet, even in this fragile hope, a question lingered. Could the scars buried deep within ever truly fade, or would they forever shape the contours of their lives? Maya did not have the answer, only the courage to seek it. The journey was far from over, but for now the first step had been taken. The room felt unusually warm compared to the biting chill outside, the soft hum of a small heater blending with the faint rustle of paper. Maya sat hunched in a molded plastic chair, the smooth edges biting slightly into her palms as she clutched her worn leather journal. Across from her, Dr. Elias Nader watched patiently, his calm brown eyes inviting the silence to be broken but not rushed. "Whenever you're ready," he murmured, adjusting the thin frames of his glasses. Maya swallowed hard, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on her chest. She flipped to a blank page and began to read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper at first. The words spilled out like fragments of shattered glass, jagged yet oddly beautiful in their stark honesty. She told of the endless nights haunted by echoes of sirens, the hollow ache where her family once was, and the unbearable solitude that swallowed her whole. I don't know if I deserve to feel this much pain, she confessed, eyes glistening with tears. Sometimes I think if I just stay quiet, pretend it didn't happen, maybe it won't hurt so much. Dr. Nader nodded thoughtfully. Survivor's guilt is a common shadow after trauma. But acknowledging your pain doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. Healing begins the moment you allow yourself to feel. Later that week, at the community center, Maya noticed Sophia, Farid, seated quietly near the back of a small circle. The teenager's usual restless energy was subdued, replaced by a fragile stillness that tugged at Maya's heart. As the group facilitator encouraged each participant to share, Sophia's voice trembled as she spoke. Sometimes the world feels too big, Sophia admitted, twisting a silver bracelet around her wrist. I get scared for no reason, and my heart races like it's trying to escape. I don't know how to make it stop. A hush fell over the room, the collective breath held in empathy. Jamal sat close, his jaw clenched but his hands subtly reaching to squeeze Sophia's shoulder. Maya watched the exchange, feeling a flicker of understanding ignite within her. The invisible wounds they all carried were real, and they could no longer be ignored. Dr. Nader's voice echoed in her memory from a recent community meeting. Trauma is not always visible. It seeps into the corners of our minds and hearts, shaping how we see ourselves and each other. The first step to healing is breaking the silence, sharing our stories without shame. Inspired, Maya volunteered to help organize a new support program at the center, hoping to weave threads of solidarity among the fractured survivors. The work was small yet significant, arranging chairs, preparing tea, listening as others spoke. Each shared story chipped away at the walls she had built around herself. One afternoon, as laughter bubbled softly from a group gathered around a chessboard, Maya caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. Tired eyes, yes, but also a tentative spark of hope. The shadow that had loomed so large was still present, but it no longer consumed her every thought. When she arrived home that evening, Maya opened her journal once more, fingers trembling as she wrote, "Today, I let someone in. It's frightening, like standing on a narrow ledge with no safety net. But maybe this is how we learn to fly." Outside, the city hummed with cautious life, the ruins slowly giving way to new beginnings. The unseen wounds remained delicate and raw, but for the first time, Maya felt the fragile stirrings of healing take root within her. As night settled, a quiet determination settled in her heart. Tomorrow, she would return to the center, to the people who carried pieces of her own pain. Together, perhaps, they could build something stronger, a mosaic of survival, resilience, and hope. Yet, even in this fragile hope, a question lingered. Could the scars buried deep within ever truly fade, or would they forever shape the contours of their lives? Maya did not have the answer, only the courage to seek it. The journey was far from over, but for now the first step had been taken. The weight of silence hung heavy in the small therapy room where I sat, the muted light casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness I'd carried inside me for so long. My journal lay open on my lap, its pages a tangle of scrawled thoughts, half-formed confessions, and memories too painful to keep locked away any longer. I swallowed hard, the tremor in my hands betraying the calm mask I'd worn these past months. Taking a breath, I began to read aloud. "I'm afraid," the words came haltingly, each syllable a fresh wound exposed. "Afraid that the pieces of my life will never fit together again, that the laughter of my children is lost forever in the silence they left behind." My voice caught, the echo of my own grief nearly overwhelming me. Yet as the words spilled out, a surprising lightness followed, as if shedding the burden might make it lighter to bear. Outside the therapy room, the city's pulse stirred with a renewed urgency. Jamal stood before a crowd gathered in the community center's main hall, his broad frame commanding attention even in the dim glow of the afternoon sun filtering through cracked windows. The scar on his left cheek, a pale line etched by fire and fate, caught the light as he spoke with a steady resolve that belied the storm of rage and pain within. "We cannot let fear dictate our future." Jamal's voice rang clear, forging a bridge between anger and hope. "Justice is not just a word. It's a call to action. We owe it to those we lost, and to ourselves, to stand together and demand the truth. But we must do so with strength, not with violence." His words ignited a spark in the crowd, faces once shadowed by despair now flickering with cautious optimism. The transformation was palpably in Gar, channeled into purpose, grief reshaped into resilience. Meanwhile, Leila moved through the community hall with her characteristic warmth, her bright smile a beacon amid the lingering gloom. She gathered survivors into a circle, inviting them to share stories, fears, and hopes. The air was thick with emotion, voices trembling yet determined to be heard. "We must heal together," Leila urged gently, her eyes meeting each participant's with unwavering compassion. "Only through understanding can we rebuild not just our city, but our hearts." Walls of suspicion began to crumble as one by one, voices intertwined in a fragile harmony. The community's fractured spirit showed signs of mending, stitch by careful stitch. In the quiet of his cluttered apartment, Omar sat hunched over a desk strewn with papers and photographs, the harsh glare of a desk lamp illuminating his intense, restless eyes. His fingers traced lines of text that revealed cracks in the official narrative failures in security. Overlooked warnings, whispers of cover-ups that threatened to unravel the tentative peace the survivors fought to build. His mind wrestled with the ghosts of his own trauma, memories of friends lost and trust betrayed. Yet he pressed on, driven by the conviction that truth, however painful, was essential for real healing. As the days unfolded, these threads of action wove together into a tapestry of change. My own breakthrough in therapy encouraged others to confront their pain. Jamal's activism rallied the community around demands for justice that did not divide but united. Leila's peace-building fostered a renewed sense of solidarity, while Omar's revelations forced a reckoning with uncomfortable realities. The path was far from easy. Fear and suspicion still lurked in shadowed corners, the shadow of fear whispering doubts and distrust. But in that moment, standing at the cusp of possibility, I felt a fragile light flicker within me, a quiet hope that even shattered glass could catch the sun and shine anew. We were beginning to turn the tide, and yet the question remained, lingering like a breath held too long. Could we truly balance the pursuit of justice with the need for forgiveness? The answer was not yet clear, but the journey toward it had undeniably begun, one tentative step at a time. As night fell over the city, the silence was no longer empty but filled with the murmurs of resilience, the heartbeat of a community refusing to be broken. And in that, there was a promise, a fragile healing, a turning of the tide, a new light piercing through shattered glass. The morning sun spilled its pale gold over the city's battered streets, casting long shadows that stretched like tentative fingers toward a future still uncertain. Rami Haddad's shop, once shuttered and scarred by the blast, now stood proudly with fresh paint gleaming under the light. A faint scent of sawdust mingled with the sweet aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the air, drawing a modest crowd of neighbors eager to witness a small but significant victory. As I wove through the gathering, heart pounding with a strange mix of sorrow and hope. I saw the cautious smiles that flickered across faces, each one carrying a story of loss, yet daring to believe in renewal. Stepping inside Rami's shop, the wooden floor still bore the scratches of hurried repairs, and shelves were stocked with essentials and treats alike. Rami himself stood behind the counter, his hands dusted with flour and paint, a tired but genuine smile playing on his lips. "It's not just about selling goods," he said quietly, eyes scanning the familiar faces. "It's about showing we're still here, still standing." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within me. This reopening was more than commerce. It was a beacon, a signal flare in the dark that the city's heart beat on. Around me, neighbors exchanged small talk, laughter bubbling hesitantly beneath the surface, as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace. Later, at the community center, the hum of activity was a balm to my restless spirit. I had thrown myself into volunteering, finding in the simple acts of sorting supplies and distributing aid a kind of therapy that no words could provide. The center buzzed with tentative energy. Survivors who had once been strangers, now bound by shared pain and a communal desire to rebuild. Leila Hassan, ever the warm pillar, moved gracefully through the room, greeting each person with a bright smile that belied the shadows she surely carried. "Every little effort counts," she told me softly when I paused beside her. "This is how we stitch the fabric back together, thread by thread, heart by heart." Her words resonated, stirring a fragile hope inside me. Perhaps this was the beginning of something new, not just for the city's battered buildings, but for the fractured souls who called it home. Outside, Jamal stood watchful, his ever-present vigilance softened when his gaze fell on Sophia. The girl lingered near the playground, fingers clutching the strap of her backpack, eyes darting nervously as children laughed and chased each other in the waning afternoon light. Jamal's scarred cheek tensed briefly as he stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "You don't have to watch from the sidelines forever, Sophia. When you're ready, we'll be right here." Sophia's breath hitched, a small smile flickering as she took a hesitant step forward. It was a quiet victory, but a victory nonetheless, a fragile thread in the larger tapestry of healing. As evening settled, the community gathered in the center's modest hall. Leila took the floor, her voice ringing clear and warm through the room. "Rebuilding is not just about bricks and mortar," she said, eyes bright with conviction. "It's about mending what's been broken inside us. Together, we can face the shadows that linger. Together, we can find strength in one another." Her words hung in the air, a gentle promise against the backdrop of loss. I felt the room lean into her message, the tentative bonds among us tightening, if only slightly, against the chill of fear and suspicion that still whispered in the corners. Walking home later, I paused beneath a fractured street lamp, its light flickering like a heartbeat struggling against darkness. I pulled my journal from my bag, fingers trembling as I wrote. Today, the city breathes a little easier. The cracks may still show, but they are filled with hope. We are more than shattered glass. We are the light refracted through it, fractured but brilliant. And with that thought, I took a deep breath, stepping forward into the uncertain dawn. The days that followed carried the gentle rhythm of rebuilding, not just the physical, but the unseen threads that held us together. At Rami's shop, neighbors gathered not only for goods, but for conversation, laughter, and the simple comfort of shared presence. Maya's volunteer hours grew, her guarded nature slowly giving way to moments of genuine connection. Jamal's protective watch softened as Sophia found small joys beyond her fears. and Leila's leadership wove a tapestry of community that dared to dream of peace. Yet beneath the surface, the shadow lingered, a reminder that healing was a fragile process, never guaranteed, always tentative. But in these small acts, reopening a shop, sharing a story, extending a hand, we took our first steps toward a future that, while forever changed, still held the possibility of light. The city was breathing again, and so were we. The morning sun filtered gently through the tall windows of the community center, casting a warm, almost golden light on the worn wooden floors. Inside, a quiet hum of activity filled the space. Soft laughter, gentle whispers, the faint scratch of charcoal on paper. Maya sat near the back of the room, her journal resting unopened on her lap as she watched the group gathered around a makeshift art therapy table. Her eyes searched for Sophia, Jamal's younger sister, who had been a constant source of worry for everyone since the bombing. And then she saw her. Sophia sat hesitantly at the table, fingers trembling as she held a paintbrush, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, a flicker of calmness spread across her features. She laughed quietly at something Leila had said, a laugh so soft and fragile it seemed to hang in the air like a whispered promise. Maya's breath caught. It was a small moment, almost too delicate to hold on to, but it was there, a thread of hope weaving itself into the fabric of their broken lives. Leila stood nearby, her bright smile illuminating the room, despite the persistent shadows lurking behind it. "Look at that," she murmured to Maya, nodding towards Sophia. "She's finding her way back, bit by bit." Maya nodded, the weight in her chest easing just a fraction. It was moments like these that reminded her why she kept coming back, why she forced herself to volunteer at the center despite the gnawing ache of survivor's guilt that never quite loosened its grip. Later that day, Maya found herself at a small cafe nestled between two rebuilt storefronts, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with the distant aroma of jasmine from a nearby garden. Jamal arrived shortly after, his scarred cheeks softening as he settled across from her, the tension in his posture easing under the gentle clatter of cups and quiet murmur of other patrons. "How's Sophia?" Maya asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. Jamal exhaled slowly, his gaze steady. "Better. Small steps, but she's moving forward. It's a relief." They fell into a comfortable silence, the city's hum a constant backdrop, a reminder that life pressed on even when it seemed impossible. Their conversation drifted from Sophia to their own struggles, the barriers they had slowly begun to dismantle between each other. Where once there had been guarded pain, now there was cautious optimism, tentative and fragile but unmistakably real. "I've been thinking about what you said," Maya confessed, "about opening up, about not carrying everything alone." "I'm trying," Jamal nodded, a rare softness touching his eyes. "Me too, it's hard, but maybe that's how we heal together." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Leila gathered the community outdoors for a small celebration, a gathering to honor survival and the beginnings of renewal. The air was filled with the fragrance of blooming jasmine, mingling with the warm breeze that teased the edges of worn banners and scattered petals on cracked pavement. Survivors exchanged smiles, tentative but genuine, sharing stories that wove a tapestry of resilience and shared pain. The laughter was not yet free, but it was there, a fragile melody threading through the collective heart. Maya moved among them, her gaze meeting familiar faces hardened by loss but softened by moments of connection. Each smile, each clasped hand was a fragile brick in the foundation they were rebuilding together. As twilight fell, Maya found herself alone on a cracked bench overlooking the city skyline. The broken glass shards embedded in the plaza below caught the fading light, fracturing it into a kaleidoscope of fractured reflections. The sight was bittersweet, a mirror of their lives, shattered yet catching glimmers of light. She pulled her jacket tighter around her, the evening chill a sharp contrast to the warmth within. Her thoughts drifted across memories, both painful and hopeful, weaving a quiet meditation on the journey they had undertaken. The shadow of fear still lingered in the corners of her mind, but tonight it felt less oppressive. Hope, fragile and tentative, had taken root. The city was still broken. The scars ran deep. But in these echoes of hope, Maya found a reason to believe that healing, however slow and uncertain, was possible. Tomorrow, she whispered to the night, we try again. And with that, she rose from the bench, footsteps light against the cracked pavement, carrying with her the fragile promise of a new day. The small apartment was thick with the scent of stale coffee and burning candles, the only light emanating from Omar Halil's laptop screen. Papers were strewn across the desk and floor, a chaotic mosaic of documents, photographs, and typed reports. Omar's fingers trembled slightly as he scrolled through the latest batch of leaked files. His eyes, sharp yet shadowed by fatigue, scanned every line with painstaking care. These documents were different, far more damning than the cautious whispers and rumors he had chased these past months. Security reports, internal memos, emails between officials' warnings about vulnerabilities ignored, protocols bypassed, and pleas for increased vigilance dismissed as bureaucratic noise. The bombing, he realized with a sinking heart, was not merely a tragic event, but a preventable catastrophe masked by negligence and silence. His mind raced, the weight of responsibility pressing down. Would the community be ready to hear this truth? Could the survivors bear the added burden of betrayal atop their grief? Omar was no stranger to pain, but this revelation threatened to unravel the fragile threads of hope woven painstakingly through the city's shattered streets. Hours later, the community center was packed. Survivors, volunteers, and city officials filled the hall, the air thick with unease. Maya Alami sat near the front, her journal resting unopened in her lap, eyes fixed on Omar as he prepared to speak. Leila Hassan stood at her side, offering a reassuring, if weary, smile, while Jamal Farid's knuckles whitened around a folded flyer, his jaw clenched tight. The room was a microcosm of the city's fractured spirit, hope and despair, trust and suspicion, all mingling in uneasy proximity. Omar stepped forward, his voice steady but low as he began to reveal the documents. Screens flickered to life, displaying emails marked urgent, reports flagged ignored. He narrated the story of silence from those meant to protect, the missed chances to prevent the worst. The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. Whispers grew to murmurs, murmurs to heated exchanges, faces contorted with disbelief, anger, and betrayal. Some shook their heads in denial, others clenched fists in rage. Maya felt her chest tighten, a cold wave washing over her. The city she once thought of as a home was revealed in a harsher, lighter place where trust had been sacrificed at the altar of complacency. Yet, amidst the turmoil, she glimpsed something fragile but persistent, the undeniable human craving for truth and justice. Outside, the evening sky bled bruised purples and reds, the ruined skyline etched against the fading light. Maya walked the cracked pavement, the silence around her broken only by distant sirens and the soft crunch of debris beneath her feet. Her thoughts churned. How could healing come when the past was so raw, so unsettled? Was forgiveness possible without accountability? Her heart ached with the weight of these questions, the fragile hope she had nurtured now tinged with doubt. Nearby, Leila and Jamal stood under the flickering street lamp, their conversation a low but urgent exchange. Leila's voice was calm yet insistent, urging patience and reconciliation. Jamal's tone was fierce, demanding justice and retribution for those who had failed them. The city's broken silhouette loomed behind them, a silent witness to their struggle. "We can't just pretend this didn't happen," Jamal said, his gaze hard. "Peace without truth is a lie." Leila sighed, brushing a hand through her curly hair. "And truth without healing will tear us apart. We have to find a way to hold both." The night deepened, the city's wounds still raw and bleeding. But somewhere in the tension lay the possibility of a new beginning. The community stood at a crossroads, caught between the shadows of the past and the fragile light of tomorrow. As Maya returned to her small apartment, she opened her journal and began to write not just the pain or anger, but the stirring hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rise from the shattered glass and find new light. The revelations of that night would echo through the days to come, challenging every survivor to decide what they valued most: justice, peace, or the delicate balance of both. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with conflict and compromise, but the first cracks in the wall of silence had been broken. The city might never be the same, but perhaps, in facing its darkest truths, it could begin to heal. And somewhere deep inside Maya, a quiet voice whispered that survival was not just about enduring loss, but about reclaiming the future, however fragile that future might be. As the chapter closes, the community braces for the storm of emotions and decisions this new truth will unleash, leaving readers poised on the edge of revelation and resolution. The community center's worn wooden floors creaked beneath the soft footsteps of those who entered, each carrying the weight of loss, suspicion, and fragile hope. Maya stood near the entrance, her dark hair pulled back tightly, eyes scanning the faces that gathered in the low-lit room. The air was thick with the mingled scents of old paint, faint incense, and nervous anticipation. Jamal, ever the steady presence, positioned himself beside her. His muscular frame rigid but open, scarred cheek catching the glow of the overhead lights. For weeks, the city had been a mosaic of whispered fears and quiet gestures of survival. Now, here in this room, survivors from different neighborhoods, backgrounds, and experiences sat together, their eyes flickering with distrust and the tentative possibility of connection. The shadow of fear still hovered a silent, invisible presence that made every glance cautious, every word calculated. Yet tonight was different. Tonight was a step toward breaking that shadow. Leila Hassan moved gracefully through the crowd, her bright smile a balm to the weary. She handed out cups of steaming tea, the herbal aroma threading warmth into the chilly autumn air. Her presence was a quiet anchor, a reminder that even amid grief, nurturing could bloom. "Thank you for coming," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion beneath. "Tonight, we begin to listen to each other, to our shared pain, and to the hope that still flickers in this city." Maya took a breath, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest loosen just a fraction. She glanced at Jamal, who nodded encouragingly. "We've all been broken," she began, her voice steady but gentle. "But maybe, together, we can find the pieces that fit." The room settled into a hush. One by one, survivors began to speak, some voices shaky, others firm but wary. Stories of loss unfolded, a mother's lament for a child, a firefighter's guilt over a fallen comrade, a teenager's struggle with nightmares. Jamal shared his own pain, the anger that once burned fiercely, now tempered by a new resolve to protect and to heal. Tensions surfaced as well-old grievances, blame cast like stones, fear of betrayal. Yet, under Leila's careful guidance, these fractures were not dismissed, but acknowledged, their raw edges softened by empathy and shared humanity. Maya found herself opening up more than she had in months. Her journal left untouched at home, replaced by words spoken aloud, weaving threads of connection. Outside, the city bore its scars with quiet dignity. The bruised purple sky deepened as evening drew near, streetlights casting long shadows on cracked sidewalks. Jamal stepped onto the stoop, the cool air biting at his skin but clearing his mind. Nearby, children played cautiously, their laughter tentative but real, a fragile echo of normalcy. Meanwhile, Omar lingered in a shadowed alley, the flickering street lamp illuminating his furrowed brow as he jotted notes. His sharp eyes, always searching, reflected a restless urgency. The truths he pursued threatened comfort but carried the promise of accountability, a necessary step toward reconciliation. Back inside, as the dialogue stretched into the night, Maya felt a stirring within her, cautious optimism born from the simple act of listening and being heard. The bridges they built tonight were fragile, yes, but they spanned the chasms carved by fear and grief. The path ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time in a while, the possibility of walking it together seemed real. As the gathering dispersed, Maya lingered by the window, watching the city pulse with life despite its wounds. The shadow of fear was still there, a whisper beneath every heartbeat, but it no longer held dominion. Tomorrow and the days beyond held promise, a chance to rebuild not just buildings, but the very soul of their community. She closed her eyes, the weight of loss balanced by the fragile light of hope. "We will find our way," she whispered to the night, the words a vow more than a hope. And in that vow, the first true step toward healing was taken. The conversation had begun, but Maya knew it was only the start. The real work lay ahead, navigating the tangled web of forgiveness and justice, confronting the lingering shadows within and without. Yet tonight, in the gentle glow of shared stories and tentative smiles, a fragile bridge had been built strong enough to carry them forward, if only they dared to cross. The city outside was broken, but not beyond repair, and neither were they. The city wore its scars like a solemn badge. Buildings stood with jagged edges, streets bore the remnants of chaos, and beneath it all, a fragile pulse of life persisted. I often found myself wandering the narrow paths of the community garden where the sun filtered gently through the leaves, casting dappled light that seemed to dance with the shadows, both a reminder of what had been lost and what was yet to be reclaimed. Today I sat on the worn wooden bench, journal in hand, fingers trembling slightly as I wrote a letter to those I could no longer speak to, my husband and children. The words were raw, each sentence a small fissure in the wall I had built around my heart. I told them of the slow, uncertain steps I was taking toward healing, not the kind that erased pain, but the kind that allowed it to coexist with hope. Jamal appeared quietly beside me, his presence familiar and steady. He carried with him the weight of loss and anger, yet there was a softness I had come to cherish in his gaze, especially when he looked at his sister Sophia, who was slowly learning to breathe beyond her anxiety. I watched from a distance as they repaired the broken window of their home together, their hands careful, their laughter fragile but real. The sunlight caught the shards of glass, scattering light like tiny promises scattered across the floor. It was moments like these that stitched me back to the world, reminding me that survival was not merely about enduring, but about embracing the cracks where light could seep in. Leila was at the community center, her voice a balm to the weary souls who gathered there. She spoke of resilience not as a grand, triumphant force, but as a gentle, persistent flame that flickered even in the harshest winds. Her smile, though sometimes stretched thin over the exhaustion of loss, held a fierce determination to nurture hope. In her eyes, I saw the reflection of all of us, a collective yearning to rebuild not just walls, but trust, compassion, and connection. Yet, the shadow of fear still lingered, an invisible presence that haunted the spaces between us. It whispered doubts, seeded suspicion, and reminded us of the fragility of peace. On an evening walk home, the soft rain began to fall, drumming lightly against my coat as the city hummed in the distance. The rain was both a cleansing and a reminder of vulnerability, washing the streets but never fully erasing the stains beneath. I welcomed the dampness, feeling it mingle with the cautious optimism swelling quietly in my chest. This was not an end but a beginning, a fragile healing that required patience and courage. In the quiet hours of the night, I often reflected on the strange paradox we lived with. The scars we bore were permanent, yet they also marked the path forward. Healing was not a destination, but a journey, one we walked together, step by tentative step, through the shattered glass of our past toward a new light. The city might never be the same, and neither would we. But in the gentle embrace of community and the shared acknowledgement of our pain, I found the strength to believe that even fractured hearts could learn to beat anew. And as dawn painted the horizon with hues of possibility, I closed my journal, ready to face whatever came next with a fragile but genuine hope. The first light of dawn stretched across the cityscape like a tentative promise, softening the jagged edges of broken glass and twisted metal that still littered the streets below. From the rooftop where I stood, the city looked both familiar and strange, scarred, but breathing, fragile yet unyielding. The skyline, once a proud silhouette of prosperity, now bore the fractures of a nightmare we all lived through, but even in its brokenness, it caught the hues of morning with a quiet dignity. I drew a shaky breath, the cool air filling my lungs as memories surged like a tide beneath the surface. The bombing had taken so much: my family, my sense of safety, the pulse of a community I thought was unbreakable. Yet here I was, still standing, still breathing, still searching for the slivers of light in the shards of shattered glass. Behind me, the city stirred. Through the narrow alleyways and street corners, life began to creep back in, tentative and cautious. The distant murmur of voices rose, mingling with the soft clang of construction and the laughter of children who dared to reclaim the streets. It was a fragile melody of survival, a testament to the resilience that flickers in even the darkest places. I traced my fingers over the worn leather cover of my journal, the pages filled with the jagged fragments of my thoughts and fears. Writing had been my refuge, a way to make sense of the chaos inside me. But now, as the sun's rays stretched further, I felt a shift, a call to move beyond mourning alone, to embrace not just the loss, but the possibility of renewal. Down below, the square that had once been a bustling market now served as a gathering place for those of us who survived. Today, it was transformed into a memorial, where candles flickered against the evening breeze and faces etched with grief found solace in shared presence. Leila's voice rose in quiet prayer, steady and warm, weaving a blanket of comfort over the crowd. Jamal stood nearby, his usual guarded posture softened by the gentle hand he offered Sophia, whose anxious eyes scanned the faces for signs of safety. The memory of that night, the explosion, the screams, the rush to save lives hovered like a shadow, but it no longer defined us. It was part of our story, yes, but not the whole of it. I found Jamal's gaze and offered a tentative smile. He nodded, a silent agreement that together we could carry the weight of our past without letting it crush us. His scars, both visible and hidden, mirrored my own, and in that shared understanding, I found a flicker of hope. As the memorial came to a close, Omar approached, his eyes sharp but softer than I remembered. In his hands, he held the latest findings from his investigation, a painful but necessary reckoning with truths long buried. His determination to seek justice was a vital thread in the tapestry of our healing, even as it stirred old wounds. We all carried different burdens, but our paths converged in this fragile new light. Later, back at the community center, the hum of life buzzed softly around me. Children's laughter mingled with whispered conversations and the rustle of pages as survivors gathered to share stories, seek comfort, and build connection. I opened my journal once more, the pen gliding over the paper with steadier purpose. Each word was an act of reclaiming my voice, a step toward transforming pain into strength. The city might never be the same, and neither would we. The shadow of fear still lingered in invisible presence, reminding us of our fragility. But within that shadow, light had begun to take root. It was fragile, yes, vulnerable to every gust of doubt and despair, but it was real. As I closed my journal, I felt the weight of survival settle not as a burden but as a mantle. To live was to honor those lost, to nurture the seeds of healing, and to walk forward with eyes open, heart cautious but hopeful. The shattered glass beneath my feet caught the first full glow of morning. In its fractured reflection, I glimpsed not just the ruins of a city, but the glimmer of new beginnings, a mosaic of broken pieces coming together to form something resilient, something whole. And so, with the dawn breaking over the horizon, I stepped down from the rooftop, ready to join the quiet chorus of a city and its people rising from the ashes, fragile but unbroken, into the new light.